I don't really remember the year, but I was around 8, so this was 2010 or 11. After getting home from school one day, I passed right out on the couch in the living room. I woke up around midnight, and of course, all the lights were out. I decided I should go to my actual bed, so I walked around the corner to my hallway. I stopped and completely froze up as there was a figure at the very end of the hallway. It was a darker than dark male silhouette, about 6'4" with no features, except that he was wearing what I'd call a cordovan hat. I couldn't even tell if he was actually looking at me, but he was definitely facing me. After a few seconds of me staring in fear, I turned and ran quickly to the other side of the house where my parents' room is, and didn't look back. I told them of what I saw, and my dad checked, but saw nothing. He told me it was probably a waking nightmare and allowed me to sleep with them for the night. Growing up, I've taken my dad's theory to heart and never thought much of it. But a few years later, when I was hanging out with my mom and sister in the living room, we got on the topic of the paranormal. My sister, she's 4 years older than me, told us of this one time, a few years ago, she had woken up in the middle of the night and thought she saw a shadowy man wearing a hat through the crack of the door. She continued to tell more stories about shadow figures, but I got distracted by the fact that she saw the same figure I saw around the same year. My sister was freaked out that I had also seen this hat man, and we discovered that it is quite a common paranormal sighting. I've never seen any shadow figure again. Although I'm quite skeptical about my sister apparently seeing shadow figures several times growing up as a child, it's still clearly an eerie and legitimate phenomenon. So this isn't the first time I've been sent a story about the Hat Man. Apparently, it's like a somewhat common occurrence to see a man in a hat in your house in the middle of the night. And I know that sounds strange, but this person is absolutely right. Like, this is a worldwide phenomenon, and there's like thousands of reports of this. And while I want to agree and say that this was likely just people having waking nightmares, that doesn't explain why it's the same exact person every single time for all these different people. I was once working as a receptionist at a 5-star resort. This incident happened during peak season. The resort was overbooked, and guests were checking into their rooms one after another at the reception counter. I was almost done checking in this nice, lovely couple when I saw this family of 5 standing behind them. I tried to finish up their check-in so I could assist the family that was next in line. You must be thinking that when I said family of 5, it's the parents and 3 kids, right? Instead, it was actually 2 parents, 2 kids, and 1 elderly woman, who at the time I assumed was either the husband's or wife's mother. Now, the resort's policy was to get the details of every guest that was staying in the resort. I told the husband that we needed everyone's details, and he just said, sure, no problem, and of course, I was expecting 5 names on the registration form. By the time I realized there were only 4 names, the family had already been to the concierge area to pick up their luggage and had left to go to their rooms. I couldn't go after them as I was assisting another guest. Like I said, it was peak season. All I could do was just watch them from afar walking towards the elevators. The whole time they were walking, the old woman just followed them from behind, quietly. I didn't give much thought to it and went back to assisting the guest that was in front of me. After the buzz had died down that afternoon, I decided to ring the family's room to inform them that they were missing details. The husband came down to the reception alone, and I told him I needed the info of his or his wife's mother's info. The man just stood there, stared at me for what felt like a minute, and said, "It's only my wife and I and our 2 kids." Obviously confused, I said, "But sir, there were 5 of you." At this point, I thought he was lying to avoid paying for an extra person. He took another minute and asked me what this elderly woman looked like. I explained that she had short gray hair, like a bob haircut. I also told him that she was wearing this red cheongsam shirt with long black slack pants. Right as I told him that, he quickly took out his phone, frantically scrolled for a few seconds, and showed me a picture of the same woman in the same clothes, lying in a closed coffin. It had a clear glass cover so you could still look inside. I just nodded slightly, and he said that it was his mother. She died unexpectedly a few months ago. I was, to no surprise, too shocked to say anything at that point, but somehow managed to mutter the words, "I'm so sorry for your loss, sir, and I'm so sorry about this." He just said it was okay, gave me a small smile, then left without saying anything. When I was younger, I was in the backseat of my family's car while we were driving home from getting groceries. It was about 7 p.m. on a winter night and pitch black. We were driving down a back road with a thick forest on both sides. I looked out the driver's side back window when we stopped at a three-way intersection when I saw a creature crouching over something under a streetlight. It stood up when our car stopped at the intersection and had to be at least 8 feet tall. Its skin was a pale pinkish color and it had a bony tail. Its eyes were the size of tennis balls and were milky white. I was terrified when I saw it, but more terrified when I saw what it was crouching over. Below it was the body of a deer, partially eaten. When it saw the car, it grabbed the deer with both hands and quickly vanished into the tree line along the road. My parents didn't seem to notice as they were caught up in a conversation. It's been about 18 years now, and I've never been able to get the image of that creature out of my head. Alright, this one is nightmare fuel for sure. Like, do you know how strong that thing had to be to pick up a deer? Like, you can't just pick up a deer, they're huge. And that part of it isn't even describing how strange this thing appeared, so I don't know, man. This one just freaks me out. I was in my senior year of high school and fell asleep watching a movie at my girlfriend's house. When I woke up, it was around 3 a.m., and realizing what time it was, I woke her up to let her know I was heading home. I'm driving home, lost in thought, happily listening to music on the same road I've driven 1,000 times before, when I suddenly feel this intense feeling of dread. No gradual shift or onset, just 0 to 100. 1 second, I'm nodding along to the music with my windows down, not a care in the world, and the next, I'm absolutely terrified. For no reason whatsoever. It's like I was just slapped in the face with fear. It was so strong that I immediately hit the brakes and stopped my car in the middle of the deserted rural road. I turn my music down, roll my windows up, and lock my doors. Then I spend a good 30 seconds stopped in the middle of the road looking around trying to figure out what the fuck is going on. Why am I so scared all of a sudden? Maybe my subconscious saw something I missed and is trying to warn me? Maybe I'm half asleep and this is some sort of sleep paralysis? Maybe I'm losing my goddamn mind? After a while of not moving and seeing nothing, the fear begins to subside. But now I'm wide awake, adrenaline pumping. I remember awkwardly laughing out loud to myself, "You are losing your mind," and I start driving again. Instantly, the feeling comes back. This time, I pull my car to the side of the road and just sit there, engine running, looking through all the windows and mirrors, racking my brain trying to figure out what's going on. It's so hard to describe. It's raw fear, yes, but after sitting there and analyzing for a while, I begin to realize it's more an overall feeling of dread or impending doom, like the promise of bad things to come. I found myself carefully adjusting anything and everything in my car that I possibly could for maximum safety. I stowed away a bunch of loose objects that were on the seats into my center console. I adjusted the height of the headrest and the steering wheel. I adjusted all of my mirrors. One thing worth mentioning is that my car, a 1995 Saturn SL2, had an automatic seatbelt that went across the shoulder when you closed the door, and because of that, I would never bother to use the manual lap belt. However, this time I did. I remember I actually had to get out of my car and dig it up from the side of my seat where it was jammed from years of neglect. I carefully put both my regular automatic seatbelt and the manual lap belt on, and with the stereo off and my hands at 10 and 2, I started to slowly drive down the road again. I know I only have about 10 more minutes of driving before I'm home, and that I've prepared everything to be as safe as possible, and damn it, I need to get home. But no matter how long I drive, I just can't shake the feeling. Instead of fading, it's actually getting worse. The longer I drive, the more scared I'm getting, and the stronger the urge to stop the car is becoming. I keep driving, slower and slower, but I keep driving. You know how when you're young and afraid of the dark, sometimes you would sprint through the darkness to get to the light switch or to your bed or wherever it was safe? Well, that's what happened to me as soon as I saw my driveway. An animalistic and uncontrollable fear took over, and just like when I was 6 years old running through the pitch-black basement to get to the light switch, I threw caution to the wind and stomped on the gas to get to my driveway as soon as possible. That's when the deer jumped out. I don't know what speed I was going when I hit it, but I remember seeing my windshield smash, and the next thing I know, I'm waking up upside down, held in place by my lap belt, in my car, which had rollen down a cliff. There's blood everywhere, but I'm not seriously injured. I climb up the cliff and limp home to wake up my parents and tell them the entire story, start to finish. They ended up telling me that they've both had similar experiences with inexplicably bad feelings and to always listen to your gut. The car was totaled, but I was alive, and many who saw the aftermath said if I hadn't worn my lap belt, I probably would have died. Fast forward 5 years. I'm driving in a car with 4 other people. It's about midnight and we're heading home from a party. Everybody is being loud and laughing, and the music is thumping, and we're all having a great time. Wham! That same dark feeling of fear hits me like a ton of bricks. I immediately pull the car over. Everybody asks me why we've stopped, and I start telling the whole story of the first time I had this same feeling 5 years ago. By the time I've finished, it's been about 15 minutes. The feeling is gone, and my drunken, high passengers are thanking me for the ghost story. We keep driving. The feeling doesn't come back. All is good. About 5 minutes up the road, we see a horrific crash at an intersection involving 2 cars. We are the first ones on scene, and we call 911. 2 people are dead. We find out later the crash happened exactly when and where we would have been had I not pulled over. My buddy still likes to jokingly thank me for saving his life. I've only had the feeling twice in my life, both while driving and both before potentially fatal accidents. It's been 15 plus years, and I haven't had that feeling or anything else even remotely similar since. But if I ever do, you better believe I'm listening to it. Now, if he had just seen a deer run out in front of him after all of those weird feelings, I really wouldn't have thought much about this one. However, if he had just bam, slammed into that deer and rolled down the hill without his lap belt on, he might not have been here to tell this story. When I was 13 or 14 years old, some older boys threw rocks from a demolition site at me and my friend. One rock hit me in the face and knocked me down. I started bleeding profusely on the sidewalk, and my friend was freaking out. We didn't have any cell phones since it was the 1990s, and we weren't near a payphone. An older man in his 50s or 60s stopped in a pickup truck and asked us to get in. My friend was like, "Oh my God," but I said, "No, let's get in, it's fine." The older man felt really trustworthy, but I didn't know why. My friend got in with me, and he drove us straight to the hospital. The hospital took his name, my friend's, and mine when we got to the ER, and the man peaced out. I had problems from the injury for 2 or 3 years, but I'm fine now, other than a small dent in my skull. My mom told me I should look him up in the phone book and call to thank him. There was exactly one name that matched his. It was an unusual name. I called it. The woman who picked up told me that he had died 6 months earlier, but his physical description matched what both my friend and I recalled. I was able to look up his obituary, and the photo matched his appearance. It was definitely eerie, and to this day, I don't really have any explanation for it. So this happened to me when I lived with a flatmate and worked nights. This one night, I came back home around 2:30 a.m., and she was supposed to be home around 6:30 a.m. that morning. I had a private balcony, and because it was winter, I kept it closed or my room would be freezing. It was odd that it was open since I remembered closing it before leaving for work, but just chalked it up to my flatmate. I closed the open door to the balcony, turned off the light outside, and got into my usual routine of taking a bath and changing for bed. It was about 3 o'clock a.m. by then, and when I hit the pillow, I fell asleep immediately. Now, this was out of the ordinary for me since it always takes me a good hour to fall asleep once in bed. I woke up about an hour later as I was really cold and saw the door to the balcony was open again and the lights were back on. I remembered closing it and turning the lights off very clearly. From my bed, I had a diagonal view to the balcony so I can see anyone who may be standing there. Just as I was about to get out of bed, I saw something move out of the shadows where I couldn't see and into the light. It was me. They climbed onto the steel railings. Once on top, she turned her neck to look back directly at me and smiled a little too wide for a person. Then she jumped off the balcony down into the fog. I was frozen. Not that I couldn't move, but more like I was shell-shocked. I got up from bed shakily after a couple of minutes, freaked out of my mind, closed the door, and turned off the lights outside again. I didn't sleep for the rest of that night. I still don't understand what I saw to this day, but it always inspires a chill down my back when it comes to mind. I haven't seen her again since. Okay, I do have to preface this next story by saying that we are going to be touching on suicide. However, with that in mind, this is one of the most powerful and touching stories I think I've ever been sent. I really do want to hear everyone's thoughts on this, so be sure to leave a comment after we get through this because, I don't know, you'll see what I mean, but this one just really tugged at my heartstrings. I always remember my dreams, but they're pretty much always too abstract to make any sense of them. It's always like 6 conflicting things going on at once, and even if you woke me up in the middle of REM sleep, my memory of them would be hazy, like I was looking at things from underwater. This is the case for every dream I've ever had, except one. When I was 13, I had an eating disorder, no friends, was on black box antidepressants that were making things worse, and just had generally atrocious mental health. I was planning on taking my own life soon. I won't go into detail, but I definitely did have a full-fledged plan with a method and a date and everything. One night, I woke up to the sound of 2 men opening my bedroom window. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't work. My first thought was, wait, this is a good thing. I want to die, right? They can kill me, and then I don't have to do it myself. Then, one of the men saw that I was awake and sitting up in bed, and climbed into my room the rest of the way, heading toward me with his hand on a gun. I thought I was prepared to die, but as he lifted it up, I very distinctly and pointedly realized that, no, I do not want to die. Then I blinked, feeling as though I had just woken up. My window was closed and there were no intruders, but I was sitting up in the same position, and otherwise my room looked exactly the same as it did in my dream. I was shaking and my heart was pounding, which is normal when you wake up from a nightmare, but it didn't go away for at least a half an hour, which is definitely not normal for me. That desire to live, though, never went away from that point onwards. Chances are it was just a dream, but even 5 years later, when I look back on it, I get chills. There's a part of me that feels like that striking realization that I wanted to live was so strong that I got a second chance. So this glitch starts a few weeks before the glitch. I get a call from an unknown number. It seems to be a wrong number or a prank, so obviously I say hello, and as soon as I say that, it disconnects. 2 or 3 weeks later, present day, my phone goes missing. I look everywhere for it, and eventually I decide to use my grandma's phone to ring my own phone. So I call it, and can't hear it anywhere. But then, someone answers. It was the same hello that I said 2 weeks ago. Obviously terrified, I disconnect from the call. I call my mom a bit later and she rings it. It was under my bed. I have no clue what happened. I've had many unexplainable occurrences throughout my life, but a couple weeks ago, I had my very first glitch in the Matrix type event. What made this one so amazing is that my husband was there for the whole thing. Otherwise, I might have written it off as my lizard brain deceiving me once again. My husband is a car guy, and he is very anal about how he operates his cars. He has all these little gadgets and doodads, so when he starts his car, he turns the key fob forward and lets all the electrical stuff start up before fully turning the key to start the engine. It probably only takes 4 seconds total. So we hop in the car one warm Sunday morning to go get all the goods for a giant breakfast. As he's turning the key over in his slow and weird way, he says out loud, "Did I bring my sunglasses?" And without skipping a beat, his car, in her car voice, says, "You did." Like she was answering his question. We both just looked at each other in shock for a second before confirming that we each heard the same thing. He looked down and saw his sunglasses sitting in the cup holder, so she was right too. His car has buttons on the steering wheel that make it speak, so he pressed the button and, sure enough, that's his car's voice. My husband is a no-nonsense military man who doesn't like to think or talk about these types of things. I was out for a walk one morning in a forest preserve that's usually pretty empty. I start coming around a corner and I can see a car that's parked in the grass just outside of a parking lot. I think it's strange, but I keep on walking. I'm probably like 50 feet from the car now, and suddenly the trunk opens, the car alarm starts going off, and the driver's side door opens. I'm coming from the passenger's side and can't see the driver, but I get a bad feeling about the situation. I still keep walking on the path and come around to where I can see the driver's side of the car. A guy is sitting in the car's driver's seat and starts to wave me over to him. He throws up his hands and says, "I'm not sure what's going on, could you come help me?" I tell him nah, he's on his own without breaking my stride and keep moving. He turns off the car alarm, gets out, shuts the trunk, then gets back in and drives away. I'm creeped out, so once he's out of sight, I double back and walk the opposite way just to be safe. I walk back probably like the 30 minutes it takes to get to the lot where I parked my car. When I'm getting close, I hear that car alarm going off again. I'm freaking out now, but didn't want to walk back into the woods again, so I keep going to the parking lot. When I get there, that same car is parked with its trunk open, car alarm going off, and driver's side door open. The guy is already talking to someone else in the parking lot. He sees me come into the lot, looks at me for a minute, then shuts off the car alarm, closes the trunk, and drives away again. I just booked it to my car and called the park rangers, but they didn't believe anything was weird about it. I'm like 90% sure that dude was trying to kidnap someone. It was early December of my senior year of high school. For the past half year, my grandfather was battling stage 4 cancer. I remember that day so vividly. I was home alone in my living room, and I started thinking about my grandfather. I started thinking about my childhood to teenage years with him. I had memories of when I was a child flooding in, and it felt so surreal. However, when the clock struck 5:35 p.m., I knew it was over for him. I have never been able to explain it, but I knew my grandfather had left this world and had moved on to the next one. I tried to tell myself over and over that I was just thinking the worst, that I was anxious, and that I needed to have hope because he's still fighting. Not even 5 minutes later, my mom calls me, and I knew right away that it was not going to be a good call. My mother told me that my grandmother had been there when Grandpa passed away at exactly 5:35 p.m. This experience also occurred to my aunt. We both knew before anyone called us that he was gone and that he had passed away. I truly believe that when there is that strong of a connection between people, they can't leave without leaving a message. Guys, I'm literally gonna have to stop including these kinds of stories in these videos because I get so many just like this. Like, so many people go through this. Now, although I'm an agnostic, I really don't know what to think when it comes to like the power of the soul and human consciousness. And what I mean by that is like, we don't really know how it works. So to give kind of an example, like, you know how the cells of a human body all sort of communicate without using language, and they all work together to sort of achieve some greater purpose? Well, who's to say that we aren't capable of something similar, or who's to say that we don't do that already right now? Like, what if all of the humans on Earth are just the cells of this greater, like, human species? You know what I mean? When we hear these stories of people like knowing when their loved ones pass away and like seeing them in their dreams and all things like that, I mean, it is very easy to just explain that stuff away logically, but I don't know. The frequency with which this stuff occurs is sometimes pretty strange. This story has always bothered me. In my head, I know what I saw, but at the same time, it felt so unreal. When I was around 10 years old, I had been invited to a sleepover for the first time at my friend's house. This friend, whom I'll call Abby, lives pretty far from me, so us hanging out always felt like a special occasion. I had just started becoming brave enough to sleep away from my parents, and because she was one of my closest friends, Abby's house was going to be one of these trial run sleepovers. Anyway, there are 3 of us girls at this slumber party. We decide to sleep on the main floor of her house so that we could stay up late watching movies that would eventually lull us to sleep. I had chosen the couch that was perpendicular to the wall of windows looking out into Abby's deck and backyard. The other girls had set up on a floor on a mattress together. They were cousins. We throw in a DVD and we fall asleep quick. Sleeping away from home has never been easy for me. I wake up frequently and sometimes can't fall asleep at all to begin with. This night was one of those times where, after clocking a solid 2 hours, something stirred me back to consciousness. Coming to, I noticed the bright light of the TV glowing first before my eyes adjusted, and noticed something outside that wasn't there before. It was a person. A man, actually. He was sitting in one of the deck chairs and had positioned it to face directly towards me where the 3 of us were sleeping. He hadn't noticed that I was awake, but seeing him made my heart race. I stayed totally still, watching him. It was dark, and so his features were a bit ambiguous, but I could tell he was studying us and smirking. Terrified, I watched him for a few minutes before turning myself into the couch cushion and closing my eyes. Some time passed, maybe a few minutes, maybe a half an hour. Finally, I mustered up the courage to look again. He was gone. To this day, I have no idea who it was that had gotten into Abby's backyard and sat on her deck watching us in the middle of the night, but the image of him sitting there grinning still haunts me. For a while, I thought it may have been her brother, but this guy had dark hair and dark eyes. Her brother was blonde. Anyways, I thought I'd share this. Luckily, we all made it into the next morning unharmed, but that was the last time I ever spent the night at Abby's house. My cousin Maria was expecting to have her baby boy on my birthday. Quite an easy birthday for me to remember. However, 2 weeks before, I was asleep, and I remember during the late hours of the night, I had a dream. In the dream, I saw that Maria would have a baby boy, and we would have it unexpectedly during the late hours of the night. I thought that I must be excited for her to have her son, and that it was strange I was even thinking of that. I finally dozed off, and when I woke up, did my morning routine, and went to eat breakfast, my family is telling me about the great news that Maria's son was born 2 weeks early during the late hours of the night. The kid is around 3 years old now, and I am still not sure how to handle this information and how I knew that he was born before a phone call was even made. At least it makes for an interesting story when he's older. A few days ago, my toddler tossed our key off the bed, and we watched it as it flew down to the floor, but it made no sound. I assumed it flew into a pile of sheets I had, but it's gone. I've ripped apart my bedroom, shaken every last piece of clothing, checked pockets, under and behind the radiator, in all the drawers, every inch of our bedroom, and it's gone. Maybe somewhere in another dimension, I grabbed my laundry and there's 2 of them. I'm going to hope this is just another fun theory, but I'm pretty sure it's just been yeeted into another reality. Edit. I found them tucked into an old empty wallet that I haven't touched in weeks, sitting on my dresser under a bunch of random stuff where my son couldn't reach. My husband and I are dumbfounded as to how it got in there, tucked nicely, folded, and clasped shut. There's no possible way in all the physics it just landed in there when we both saw it tossed in a completely different direction. Weird. This story happened a few years ago. I was about 13, just chilling playing some Far Cry 5 single player, meaning I couldn't talk or hear anyone, just the sounds from the game. No one else was in the house with me, and it took place at about 8 o'clock at night. I was wearing headphones while playing the game at full volume when suddenly, out of nowhere, I hear, "Hey, you okay, Elliot? Why don't you go to bed?" This freaks me the fuck out, considering I wasn't in a party call or on a call with anybody, just playing by myself. I'm so in shock that I turn off the PlayStation and go downstairs. I was physically shaking. I remember the voice so vividly, it was very deep, like an old man almost. Anyways, that being freaky enough, a few months go by and I'm laying in bed. I was kind of sad about something that happened earlier that day. I can't remember what it was now, but I was just laying in bed miserable when my dad opens my bedroom door and says the exact sentence in the exact same way. "Hey, you okay, Elliot? Why don't you go to bed?" I got goosebumps all over. I don't know how that happened, but it still freaks me out to this day.